welcome, bienvenue, or as we say here in Abidjan, Akwaba, to these annual meetings, to probably the first side event of these annual meetings. And it is a bit of a challenging slot, as we can see, but I'm confident that more people will join us for what will be a very exciting discussion this morning. My name is Daniel Schroth. I'm the Director for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency at the African Development Bank, and I have the pleasure to facilitate today's side event. As you know, the theme of these annual meetings is making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. And it's therefore opportune to start these annual meetings with a side event that focuses on the critical role of blended finance in leveraging African capital in support of Africa's energy transition. And this capital is, of course, critical in order to contribute to overcoming the big paradox, which is, on the one side, resource abundance, particularly renewable energy, whether that's solar across the continent, whether that's wind, particularly in the coastal regions, hydro, particularly in Central Africa, geothermal along the East African Rift Valley. And on the other side, you have a continent that still lacks access to energy, both 600 million people lacking access to electricity and almost 1 billion people lacking access to clean cooking solutions, with all the negative side effects in terms of health, gender empowerment, amongst others. And obviously the other part of this paradox is that Africa is still receiving only a fraction of global investments going into supporting its energy transition. So today's event really has two key objectives. The first one is to better understand and to highlight the role that blended finance can play in catalyzing African investors and mobilizing the billions, or shall I say trillions, needed for this energy transition, taking into account that African pension funds alone have assets under their control exceeding more than $380 billion US. So there's a significant amount of resources on the continent that we need to find ways to tap into more effectively. And the second objective of this meeting is really to highlight the role of the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, SEFA, which is the bank's largest in-house blended finance facility, highlight how SEFA is supporting Africa's energy transition, and also highlighting how SEFA is a key tool to deliver on the bold vision of Mission 300, which is to provide access to electricity to 300 million Africans by 2030. The agenda will be as follows. We will start with opening remarks from the Vice President, Dr. Kevin Kariuki. We will then have a short presentation from Joao Cunha on the role of SEFA, the instruments, the tools, and some of the examples of projects that SEFA has been financing. And we will then have an exciting panel discussion with both representatives from the public sector side and the private sector side. So very pleased that you're with us this morning, despite the early hour, and looking forward to a fruitful conversation today. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kevin Kariuki, the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth at the African Development Bank, to deliver the opening remarks. Kevin, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this session on the role of blended finance in mobilizing Africa's private capital in support of Africa's energy transition. The discussion could not have come at a more appropriate time, considering the seismic geopolitical changes in recent events, precipitating significant change in characteristics of aid, which in turn calls for support that inculcates greater investments. Not surprisingly, this is perfectly aligned with the theme of this year's annual meetings, which, as Daniel just articulated, is making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. Today's session will also come at a critical juncture, for the continent's development, with close to 600 million people still lacking access to electricity and close to 1 billion people without access to clean cooking. This massive energy gap is a binding constraint to economic growth and socio-economic development of the continent. While Africa is blessed with abundant renewable energy sources, including about 10,000 gigawatts or 60% of the best solar energy potential, and 350 gigawatts of hydroelectric potential, investment flows into Africa remains insignificant. This is evidenced by the fact that between the year 2000 and 2020, 2 decades ago, Africa accounted for only 2% of the 2.8 billion global renewable energy investments. Financing at scale is therefore urgently needed to accelerate and ramp up the energy transition, particularly through investments that deliver high socio-economic impact in rural and peri-urban areas. In this regard, the continent has a faithful partner in the African Development Bank Group, which is fully committed to supporting Africa harness its renewable energy potential and scale up energy access. Accordingly, the proportion of our portfolio that is renewable energy-based has increased to over 90% in the last 10 years. Thanks to our growing toolkit of investments designed to crowd in private sector investments and capital markets in the energy sector. A toolkit that includes concessional finance that is required to catalyze billions of investments required, including from domestic and financial markets. But more concessional finance is required. In this regard, thanks to our donors, including Germany, we are particularly proud of the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, CEFA, our flagship blended finance facility that continues to catalyze private investments in the renewable energy space, including the recently the projects that have started construction, the 200 megawatt Komombo and 100 megawatt Kairouan solar power projects in Egypt and Tunisia, respectively. Suffice it to say that the catalytic impact accrues because by deploying concessional loans as well as other instruments such as grants and junior equity, CEFA holistically addresses challenges including the high cost of capital, limited access to long-term financing, in addition to risks associated with novel technologies as well as emerging business models. To date, CEFA has committed over $300 million in more than 100 projects, including both utility-scale wind and hydropower projects and decentralized renewable energy funds and platforms that invest in standalone solar home systems, mini-grids, clean cooking, as well as electric mobility. CEFA's investment portfolio portends tremendous development outcomes. It is expected to generate 2.3 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity and provide 5 million connections by 2030, confirming CEFA's centrality in addressing Africa's energy challenges through scalable solutions. Yet, this is a drop in the bucket. The scale of the challenge is of such magnitude that it requires the concerted action from all stakeholders, from governments to private sector, and indeed financial sector, which is why we have an action-oriented panel of bank partners assembled here today. This is also why the African Development Bank is collaborating with the World Bank to launch the Mission 300, a bold initiative to provide electricity access to an additional 300 million people in Africa by 2030. One of the key pillars of the 5 pillars underpinning Mission 300 is the promotion of greater private sector investments in the power sector. In this regard, Mission 300 seeks to leverage blended finance to enhance private sector investment by combining public, private, and philanthropic funds. This approach will help de-risk projects and mobilize capital for the energy infrastructure that we require. I am therefore very proud to observe that CEFA is a key delivery vehicle for Mission 300, in which capacity it is perfectly positioned to support mobilization of private capital, both international and domestic, at speed and at scale. In conclusion, I wish you fruitful deliberations in this workshop and hope that we can jointly generate the sustainable momentum for translating ambition into action, a momentum that will unlock the transformative potential of renewable energy in Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for these remarks, and particularly also emphasizing the critical role of Mission 300, which really has the potential to be a game changer in terms of addressing the continent's deficit, and also in terms of working with African countries in undertaking the required reforms that allow for more private sector investments, both from domestic investors as well as from international investors. So without further ado, I'll invite my colleague João Cunha, the coordinator of the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, to tell us a little bit more about what CEFA does concretely.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And I guess the Vice President already said a lot, right? You provided a very good summary of CEFA, so there's probably very little to add, but I'll try to illustrate with a bit more color. Let's get this started. Thank you. Right. Try to summarize CEFA in 5 minutes. There's a lot of detail. There's lots of richness. It's an initiative that has been rolling for over 13 years now. It has 2 lives. The first life was between 2012 and 2019, was primarily operating as a technical assistance facility, doing project preparation and some enabling environment support. But it's really ramped up in 2020. It became a blended finance facility. It received significant and very large tickets from donors, and we were able to then pivot towards investing in projects and not just sort of providing technical assistance. So I think we've heard about SDG 7 and Mission 300. So let's emphasize the fact that CEFA is AFDB's strategic blended finance facility to unlock private investments in Africa's energy transition. It is currently capitalized at 600 million or thereabouts. It is set up as a multi-donor trust fund or special fund managed by the African Development Bank with a dedicated team, and is providing catalytic financing instruments to both large utility-scale projects, but also to emerging decentralized renewable energy technologies, projects, and platforms. It operates across 3 thematic areas, or 3 strategic pillars, if you will. The first one is what we call green baseload, but is effectively about power systems in the African continent. And it's about supporting the penetration of renewable energy while addressing aspects of variability, which are common with wind and solar as variable resources. So it has a strong focus on stability and on flexibility in power systems while phasing out fossil fuels. So it is really about providing an alternative to fossil fuels and about decarbonizing the power system. The second strategic pillar is green mini-grids, which is effectively our energy access pillar, and it's about providing electricity access in underserved areas, normally rural and peri-urban, through independent grids or isolated grids managed by the private sector. So here there is a strong emphasis in promoting new rural electrification business models using private sector capacity, ingenuity, capital. The last pillar is energy efficiency. This is about optimizing the use of renewable energy since it needs to be sort of really used in an effective manner, because it's not always available. Wind is not always available. Solar is not always available. Hydro may not always be available. So it's really about optimizing and doing so by not just policy interventions, but also the promotion of efficient appliances, emerging appliances businesses like clean cooking and e-mobility. The scope is threefold, and it goes from both upstream support to investments. And the next slide should speak to that. Oh. Is it going there? All right. So we do have a broad toolbox of instruments and a holistic approach to unlocking private investments. And by holistic, we mean we can intervene across the various segments or across the value chain, if you will, from upstream support to governments on policies, regulations, plans, all the way to investments in projects and investing in investments in platforms. So we use technical assistance grants, and that's our DNA. Historically, as I mentioned earlier, we were a technical assistance facility. So this is something we've mastered. This is something we can do very well. And we have quite a sizable portfolio in this regard. And through TA, we've been really pioneering a new generation of programs and facilities to address some of these upstream gaps, to do project preparation. So we understand that pipeline in the continent is still lacking, and there's a need for an extra push to bring projects to bankability. Then we have equity and quasi-equity instruments. And here, the objective really is to provide an element of de-risking for commercial investors. And again, we're coming into the theme of today's event, and hopefully we'll hear more about it. But it's really about sort of providing junior tranches, first loss capital. And we've done so in a number of funds, investment funds and platforms, which are targeting nascent markets, like clean cooking, for example, mini-grids, energy access, and we'll see more about it in the next slides. And then the last piece, or the last set of instruments, is the debt instruments, senior and mezzanine, priced concessionally. And these are often deployed to close viability gaps, to improve the risk and return proposition for commercial investors, to calibrate the project economics, to make sure that these projects are viable and bankable. All right, so let me just run through some very quick examples. So on the upstream support, I talked about programmatic approaches to technical assistance. There are three here that we're quite fond of. One is the Africa Energy Transition Catalyst. This is to support countries in developing their energy transition agendas. So there's an element of planning, support with planning of capacity development on energy transition topics or renewable energy topics, but also of project preparation. And there's a significant amount of work that is now being ramped up on, for example, transmission and distribution, which is a critical enabling piece for the integration of more renewable energy. Then we have the African Mini-Grid Acceleration Program, which is also supporting countries in designing bankable mini-grid scale-up programs to bring in the private sector. So that includes also elements of policy, of regulations, some feasibility work, but also design of subsidy programs. And last but not least, we have a program that we call the Africa Hydropower Modernization Program. And this is about bringing an aging hydropower fleet that we are seeing in the continent to the 21st century, bringing all these legacy assets that are over 30 years old. And we've done a study with International Hydropower Association, and we discovered that about 50% of the hydropower fleet in Africa is over 30 years old. So it's in need for some rehabilitation, some modernization, and the idea is to use these legacy assets, integrate with wind and solar, bring the latest digital technologies, refurbish the turbines, and really sort of give them a new lease of life without having to incur high financial and environmental and social costs, building, greenfield assets in hydropower. Moving on the catalytic on the sort of equity side, and some of the junior equity investments we've made in recent years have targeted nascent markets. So we've helped new funds, new investment platforms raise additional commercially priced capital, either from DFIs or from private investors, to new market segments. So we have clean cooking. We anchored the first dedicated commercial clean cooking fund. We've also anchored the first debt fund for energy efficiency businesses, and we have Signum Capital, and Clemens will probably tell us a bit more about it. I would say that one of our sort of favorite platforms that has really delivered has been the Facility for Energy Inclusion, which is a large debt platform for small-scale renewables, providing very flexible and bespoke instruments to really move the needle on financing of C&I projects, mini-grids, small IPPs, and obviously solar home systems. And on the debt finance side, as mentioned earlier, it's been really about closing viability gaps, primarily in project finance structures. And we've done that across sort of different sort of objectives. For example, in the case of Gabon, which is a hydropower plant, there's nothing sort of innovative about it, but the reality is that Gabon is heavily reliant on gas. Gas there is a very cheap resource. For us to provide an alternative, a clean alternative, we had to really buy down the tariff, and we did so through a concessional debt instrument. In the case of Zambia, this is a semi-merchant power plant that is selling into the Southern Africa Power Pool through an intermediary off-taker. So it's quite an innovative sort of off-take arrangement where there's an element of price risk. So our concessional debt has been there also to sort of absorb some of the potential price variability embedded in that business model. And then finally, we have the Kairouan Solar PV in Tunisia, which is a project that was hard hit by COVID. It saw significant escalation of EPC costs at the time, and without an emergency intervention from CEFA, the project wouldn't have reached financial close, and it wouldn't be under construction as it is the case now. So some different examples of application of our instruments. So I'm wrapping up, Daniel, very quickly. This is a measure of our success. We've seen significant ramping up of capital deployment over the last 5 years. That's when CEFA 2.0 has been in operation. So the first diagram, you see, we've been deploying capital. We've seen a growth year on year of roughly 50%. So in 2021, we deployed $25 million. In 2024, we deployed over $100 million. And our cumulative capital deployment has now reached over $300 million. We have a very healthy pipeline in 2025. Again, you can see that there is huge demand for these kinds of capital, these kinds of instruments. And we expect to sort of, breach the $400 million sort of portfolio by the end of this year. 2024 was our best year on record. We're very proud. We delivered funding for 14 projects, north of $100 million. I think we've heard about impact figures from VP Kariuki. Just to underscore that we expect to catalyze 13 billion by 2030 on the basis of our current portfolio and deliver up to 5 million connections. And if you're curious, if you want to learn more about CEFA, which I'm sure you are, bring your cameras up. You can download our annual report. It's fresh off the press. Literally, the ink has not dried yet. We were finishing it last night. And you can learn more about what we did in 2024, but even sort of about our portfolio, about our financials. Yeah, it's all there. Finally, one word of appreciation to our donors. None of this would have been possible without them. They've been extremely generous. They've gone with us. They've walked with us through this journey. We have Germany here sort of representing this community. It's a large community, as you can say. North American, European, and Asian donors. They're all here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Joao, for giving an overview of CEFA's work, CEFA's portfolio, and also evolution over the last couple of years. And it's really now my pleasure to invite our distinguished panelists to join me up here on the podium. And first, I would like to invite Dr. Bärbel Kofler, the Parliamentary State Secretary in the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and the Governor of Germany for the African Development Bank. Welcome. Would also like to invite Marlene Jennings, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Arch Emerging Partners, Market Partners. Welcome. Next, I would like to invite Clemens Kalice, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Signum Capital. Also like to invite Derek Chine, who is the Chief Investment Officer of ARM Harith. And last but certainly not least, I would like to invite our close friend, Chipedi Morimong, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Africa 50, to complete the panel this morning. Thank you very much for your availability to join us for this, I think, very exciting topic. And let me kick off with Dr. Kofler. We've already heard, obviously, that Germany is placing a lot of emphasis on supporting private sector investments. I think it's been a key feature, for example, of the Compacts with Africa, which was launched during the German G20 presidency. You're also a big supporter of the Just Energy